Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you out there. If there's a few of you out there yet, I am Bob Plankers. I am a staff technical marketing architect at VMware Corporation, and it's my pleasure, my privilege actually, to talk about compliance and security today. The relationship between them. I titled this Compliance Isn't Security and Other Lies We Tell Ourselves. And yeah, well, are they lies? Are they not? I don't know. We'll explore this whole thing. I'm wearing my what I call my customer hat. I spent 23 years in the public sector doing compliance and security and being a sysadmin and a virtualization admin and that. And so I thought I'd wear my customer hat. University of Wisconsin-Madison. We did a lot of compliance stuff there. PCI, HIPAA, NIST 800-53, NIST 800-171, all kinds of stuff. And so, yeah, a little bit of support there. Not saying anything else there, but this stream here, let me move. One of the nice things about this is move my chat window over here so that I can see questions coming in. But this talk today is part of our October Cybersecurity Awareness Month support. CISA, your feelings on the government can differ. I'm sure we all have different opinions about that, but I really like CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency in the U.S. government. I really support what they've been doing. They've been good partners to us at VMware, and it's nice that they put this together and kind of coordinate a lot of this stuff. So thank you, CISA. If you get an opportunity to go out to their website, they've got great stuff about like insider threats and things that we don't really talk about a lot, but are really important. And so, yeah, my little plug for them. But yeah, October, the other thing too, people say, well, shouldn't security be all year round? Well, yeah, of course, but we do what we can. This month is a good excuse to talk about this stuff and generate some content. Speaking of that, we've got some stuff coming up here where this is our fourth in the series. We'll talk about compliance today. Next Monday for Halloween, we're going to squeak in one right at the end of the month here, and we'll talk about infrastructure hardening. And I'm going to publish new security configuration guides for it, and we'll walk through them, and for vSphere and all that stuff, sort of stuff. So yeah, come back and join us on Halloween. I probably won't have any costumes on or anything like that. If you're watching us, I'm using a product called StreamYard to put this out on LinkedIn and YouTube, a couple of different YouTube channels, and Twitter, and all kinds of stuff. If you're wanting to ask questions, please do. That's the benefit of doing a live presentation, is that you can actually ask questions. If it doesn't seem, I'm usually on top of them really quickly here. I got a chat window open. If it doesn't seem like I'm answering your question, try coming over to the YouTube channel, the vSphere YouTube channel, and asking it there. That might be more compatible. I've had complaints that I haven't answered people's questions, and I'm sorry about that. If that's you out there, I don't mean to do that. So anyhow, thanks for joining. I am so cool. I get a couple of disclaimers. This is actually, most people skip through these. I actually use it as an opportunity to talk about how security is context dependent, and what I might suggest as a security thing, something to do, might not be right for you and your organization. And for compliance, it really doesn't matter what. Sorry, I got something wrong with my eye here. It doesn't really matter what what I think or what you think. It matters what your auditor thinks. We'll talk about that. We're going to talk a lot about auditors today. I like auditors. I think we all should be on the same team. I don't like the adversarial relationships we end up having with them. And so a lot of my guidance, from experience, a lot of my guidance around that, and how do we defray those sort of, you're not defray, but how do we de-escalate situations with auditors, and that we all should be on the same team, right? Can't we be all one big happy family? Anyhow, joking aside, the silos do exist, cylinders of excellence in IT, but anyhow, the other thing too, if you ask a question that strays into futures, I might talk a little bit about futures later in this presentation. And some things that aren't implemented yet. Just a reminder, this is the VMworld revenue recognition thing. Don't buy things that don't exist. Bridges, features, you get it. Anyhow, that's done. The agenda. Let's talk about why people do this stuff. You know, yeah, TLDR, they want to get paid. They want to be part of an industry that does something. We'll talk about compliance in the cloud and then also compliance not in the cloud. Those are two different things based on implementations. We'll talk about that. And then tips and tricks for audits and auditors, you know, and we'll get into some of the specifics, some of the things, try to arm you. If you're fairly new to this, a lot of sysadmins I run into, vSphere admins, cloud admins that I run into, just think that this stuff is, well, I'll just put it this way. It should be a negotiation in a lot of cases. You know, there's a lot of wiggle room in compliance frameworks and people don't realize that. And so we'll talk a lot about that. But let's get into why people do this stuff. You know, is compliance security? You know, it's a popular thing to say compliance isn't security. Well, it does have security aspects to it, you know, but compliance, they're related. They're like cousins, you know, maybe two sides of the same coin. In fact, this slide actually used to have a picture of a quarter on it, two sides of the same coin. You know, they're related, but they're not the same. You know, they're not twins. They serve different purposes. Security, we do it all the time, right? You know, we do it to protect all of our assets all the time from constant threats, you know, the APTs and bad people on the internet, script kiddies, all that stuff. The internet is evil and is trying to attack our stuff at all times. You know, that's security, protecting against that. We shouldn't ever stop doing that. Compliance, we do on a regular basis. You know, it's assessed through audits. And after the audits, we get permission to do something. And it's a business requirement, business needs. We want to participate in an industry or do an activity that somebody's basically gatekeeping. You know, take credit cards. You know, Bob wants to get paid, right? You know, and so if Bob Corp here wants to accept credit cards to be paid, I need to I need to get permission from the payment card industry folks. You know, and they're gonna look at me and say, okay, Bob, these are our rules, the PCI DSS, their data security standard. You know, do you meet them? So I go out and hire a qualified security assessor. I think that's it's QSA. I don't think that's the right acronym. And then we work it out with them. The QSA says Bob Corp meets the requirements, and then I get permission to operate for a little while. So why do people do compliance? I like talking about this. The thing is, you know, again, along the security and compliance schism there, the two sides of the coin, there's a lot of folks that wouldn't do as much security if it weren't for the compliance frameworks, you know, and that's both a good and bad thing. Security should be done anyhow. We'd like to push that forward, but, you know, security is not, until you get bitten by something, until you're attacked, until you lose data or ransomed or any of that stuff, you know, it's not a priority for a lot of organizations, and that's sad, you know. And so some of the compliance stuff can push that forward and create a baseline for it. And so the other thing that it does, which is actually kind of nice, there's such a thing as too much security, right? Security doesn't move an organization forward. It's always overhead. You know, it keeps an organization sometimes from moving backwards really quickly. You know, it's like an insurance policy in that way, but it by itself, security does not move an organization forward. So finding the right balance of how much security to have. Well, the other thing too is security is always a trade-off, right? It's we're trading off performance, we're trading off cost, we're trading off staff time, which is just a form of cost. Sysadmin will to live sometimes, if you think about, you know, login timeouts or idle timeouts and all that stuff that can really put a damper on day-to-day operations. You know, there's a balance there. It's kind of an art to find that balance. And the compliance frameworks can help organizations that don't know how to do that, you know, and might find something on the internet that just says, turn it to 11, turn it all on. That's not necessarily good. You're going to spend a lot of time fighting the security stuff and not getting other stuff done. And so you need to have the right levels of that. And compliance frameworks actually help a lot of organizations figure that out. Another thing, they, you know, and we talked a little bit about this already, the proving that we adhere to a base level, a normalized set of standards across the whole industry. So, you know, I know that Joe Corp and Ted Corp and Bob Corp, we all have to meet the same PCI DSS, the baseline. They're not cheating over there and getting away with something. We all meet the same things. We've all been audited, that sort of thing. And so, a little bit of trust. Noel, hey, Noel. Compliance is to protect from liability and to help enforce configuration management. It's only a step in security. Right on, pal. Again, they're two different things, and they serve two different purposes, and that's really important to understand the distinction there. So liability is a big thing too, and that's actually so an auditor is putting their name on the line when they audit and they sign off on stuff too, and so that's why that can be the foundation for some of the confrontational stuff if they feel like you're being cagey or whatever. But we'll get into that. I'm getting ahead of myself. Good comment though. Keep them coming. So last thing you gain when you pass these requirements, everything is good. You gain something, an ATO, authority to operate. And sometimes you see these acronyms and you don't know what they are. ATO is authority to operate. Sometimes it's called that. Sometimes it's just a letter from somewhere, whatever. But basically says, hey, you want to accept credit cards? You passed your audit. You can accept credit cards. Go ahead. It's got a time. It's got a term limit on it. Like you can accept credit cards for. You can do this activity. You can run a nuclear power plant, Bob Corp's nuclear power plant and healthcare facility, and prison and whatever. There's a ton of regulated industries, run them all together, but you can only do it for a year until you pass your next audit, that sort of thing. And so that's a regular basis, but it's not all the time. Continuous compliance is nice in that you can get ahead of the big audits and help generate artifacts and things. As we go, but realistically from an auditor perspective, it's periodic. Anyhow, what I want to talk about a little bit here is types of compliance at VMware. We've got certifications and standards as part of compliance. So FIPS, common criteria, validating that, the cryptographic libraries. In fact, I had a conversation this morning about this. Cryptographic libraries inside of vSphere are validated to FIPS 140-2. And a level 1, because level 2 requires hardware and all kinds of stuff, and we're software, so level 1. But when we publish it on our website. If you just search for VMware FIPS 140-2, you'll find it. And this is inside the products. The products are built like this and comply and make it easy for customers to implement these things in regulated areas. Common criteria is an interesting one. We just got the renewed certification for ESXi 7 common criteria. These things are validation that what we say is true in the product, the security controls, isolation in ESXi, all kinds of stuff, the cryptographic libraries, entropy and randomness, so that we have secure keys and that. All that stuff works. A third-party lab checks all of that stuff, looks at our code. It's very in-depth. It's actually a big pain in the rear, but it's great because it validates that we've done it right. And then we get the certification, we publish it, all is good. Second thing is cloud stuff. We deliver some things, our own corporate entity, we need to comply with things because we're a vendor into certain regulated markets and that. But also our software as a service stuff, VMware Cloud on AWS, all that stuff. And we audit and have certifications, compliance audits done against VMware Cloud, for example. We'll talk about that in a second. But then we publish that stuff, and that helps a lot of organizations. Just again, it's all overhead, and if we can do it for you, you just outsource it to us. It's easier. And then the other thing is on premises. We've got compliance enablement. How do we explain to an auditor can we help people understand that a compliance framework, when it's asking for certain things, this feature in vSphere or in NSX or wherever maps to that requirement, and so we publish some documentation about that, and we're always updating that sort of thing. And so trying to help people understand, help auditors understand what they're looking at, help people know what they need to do to turn things on, that sort of stuff. And that's evolving as we go here. So I'm going to talk about these two things mostly. The product security thing, pretty straightforward on that end. We publish a lot of that stuff. So a big thing, the difference, we need to talk a little bit about, how compliance is done. And it's done on, these audits are done on implementations. They're not done on products. We often get asked, hey, Bob, is vSphere PCI compliant? Well, the answer is no, but wait, there's more. I always relate it back to construction. People understand construction more than a lot of this stuff, and so FIPS, we were talking about FIPS 140-2. vSphere is FIPS validated. It's kind of like the UL rating on a light switch. This particular light switch is UL rated. In Europe, it's CE, whatever, same deal. There's internal certifications that this is a validation that whoever made this thing used certain safe practices, that sort of thing. Doesn't mean, though, that you can't wire it up to burn down your house. No, you can still wire it up to burn down your house. And that's what the building inspector is looking at, right? They want to see that you implemented it correctly. And so regulatory compliance auditors are like the equivalent of that in IT. So it's neat that vSphere and ESXi has common criteria certifications and FIPS and all that stuff. Great. How'd you set it up, though? vSphere is used in some of the most secure environments in the world. But, you can still wire, knowing that, you can still wire it up to be insecure. You can still put it out on the internet. You can still use terrible passwords or no passwords. You can still do all kinds of things. And there's also a lot of people in process that need to be worried about here too. It's not just technical controls. In fact, NIST 800-53, it's mostly people in process, honestly. And the technical controls are, features, turn that feature on, use that feature, that sort of thing. And so that's what they're checking. That's what the auditors are checking for. And so that's a real difference, especially when it comes to the cloud. A cloud like VMware Cloud on AWS is an implementation. And so we can have that audited. And in fact, the certifications, like the common criteria certifications, need an implementation. If you go and look at the actual document, the actual document are the artifacts from that, you'll see that it's based on a very specific implementation of a very specific Dell server with a very specific configuration of NICs and a very specific CPU. And I mean, it gets really into detail about, RAM and all that stuff and BIOS settings, all of that thing, because they're judging it based on, they have to implement it in order to take a look at it. Right. So it's actually based on an implementation. If people, once in a while, we get people that say that they only want to run in the common criteria certified configuration. And, that's hard, that's really tough sometimes. So, but again, it's there to validate that what we're saying about the security is true. So back to the topic at hand here, again, how do we answer that question? Is VMware vSphere PCI DSS 321 compliant? I never want to say no, because people think, oh my goodness, like we can't use that. But that's not how it works, and so I always have to have this protracted conversation in that. And I've got an email template that I can just paste in now. It can be. It depends on how you implement it. Did you implement it in such a way that's PCI compliant or not? Now, on the flip side, is VMware Cloud on AWS PCI DSS compliant? Yes, it is. The implementation has been documented, audited, and it meets the specifications for that particular regulatory framework. The customer workloads, though, your workloads are not covered by that particular thing. And so one of the things that we have in the cloud is called the, we're getting spam in here. I guess put user in timeout. There we go. Sorry, folks. There we go. And I guess that's a good thing that I'm popular enough that I'm getting spam in my YouTube channels. But what was I saying? Shared responsibility model. We've got this thing called the shared responsibility model to delineate who's responsible for what. Good fences make good neighbors. I've always believed that, whether it's an API or a relationship with another team in IT or whatever, good fences make good neighbors. And so this is our version of that. I'm all discombobulated here. At the bottom of this, we've got AWS, and VMware works with AWS. But AWS procures the physical computing environment, the servers, the storage, networking, the cabling, all that stuff. They do data center security, the resilience there. Then they handle the regulatory compliance audits of that stuff. So that's their responsibility, and they publish that stuff. And so we can inherit their work. We inherit it by pulling it up into the SDDC. So VMware takes responsibility for the deployments of vSphere, vCenter Server, NSX, and all the managers and all that stuff on the AWS hardware, for example. We do the lifecycle management there, patch it, maintain it. We monitor the health of it, repair it when something's broken, and then we handle the regulatory compliance at that level. Customers then are responsible for their workloads. Customers provision VMs, they take care of the firewalling and VPN connectivity to them, the security controls for the workloads themselves, security inside the SCDCs. And they also take care of the security inside the workloads itself. We don't get into actual like Windows GPOs and that. Inside the boundary of the VM, that's your problem. And we've got tools that will help with that and do cool things in there or whatever. But from a strictly VMware Cloud on AWS perspective, that's somebody else's problem. That's a you problem, not me problem. Again, not the line can be a little blurrier there, but but that's generally how it breaks down. And you'll see that so we publish all of our audits, all the audit findings and certifications that we get. We've got the Cloud Trust Center, and if you just again Google it, VMware Cloud Trust or whatever, you'll find this, and you can sort by the different products and the certifications that are available for them. We've got a lot of them. We're working on more of them. We're always keeping these up to date. So it turns out if you do one, you kind of figure out how to do them all. It just is a time and money thing with auditors, that sort of thing. But it's really handy because it helps organizations. It just outsources all that overhead, and so you can just inherit what we've done, and hopefully the auditors will accept that, and they should. Most of them do. So beyond that, it can be a conversation with our staff. Okay, so that's the cloud. Cloud is easy. Somebody else takes care of it. You just worry about your workloads, things like that, and that really reduces the scope a lot. Let's do on-premises stuff now, the more traditional data centers. This is harder because you're responsible for all of it, but that's all right. That's more of a traditional model here. And so we publish stuff, core.vmware.com/compliance. We also have /security, /ransomware. There's a bunch of cool stuff out there. And the screenshot's old at this point. As soon as I take a screenshot, it's out of date, of course. But we publish a bunch of stuff up here. The flagship thing is VMware Cloud Foundation. We do a lot of compliance work against Cloud Foundation. That's not to say we're abandoning vSphere or any of that stuff, but Cloud Foundation is sort of a nice reference architecture, and it tells a better story about the whole thing. A lot of the compliance stuff, you look at like NIST 800-53, for example, if it wants you to be doing certain activities around monitoring and alerting and things like that maybe vSphere by itself doesn't do, but in conjunction with Log Insight or vRealize Operations Manager, and I know we're renaming that. I don't know all the new names for things. VROPS, though, together there's a better story there, and we can actually talk about that. But if you take the compliance kit, for example, and you open it up, it's a zip file. And here, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'll show you what's in it here. So that's the validated guidance. What is VMware doing to help? Well, the validated guidance. So the kit, basically, zip file, you open it up. There's a few different spreadsheets. There's some documentation around the controls and things in there. And the spreadsheets are nice. There's different things for vSphere, and it shows the different products in there. And so you can actually take the vSphere stuff and just use it for vSphere, Cloud Foundation, thanks, even if you don't have Cloud Foundation, or maybe you do have Cloud Foundation and have deployed it differently, you can still use this guidance, and that's helpful. So we call these artifacts. That's another term you'll see when you're talking to compliance folks. And, artifacts, what are we, some archaeological expedition here? Yeah, well, kinda, actually, digging through layers of infrastructure to figure out the truth about them and how they're implemented and things. But the two different types of artifacts that you'll encounter are generally compliance frameworks themselves, and then implementation guides. And so there's some distinct differences there, and people mix and match these things. They talk about them interchangeably, and they're not interchangeable. And so let's go through it. I don't like slides with lots of words on them, but I think it'll work here. So compliance frameworks are the general guidelines. And I say guidelines because, we'll talk about that in a second. General principles, what you need to do, what you need to get done, the direction you want to head. Implementation guides, though, are technical instructions for a specific product. Compliance frameworks don't deal with individual products. They cover the what you need to accomplish in a general sense, and so it's up to you. It's up to somebody else to, it's not the compliance framework's job to figure out how to get a particular product to be compliant, but people publish implementation guides that do it. And so that's the helpful thing, but there's some gotchas there as well. Compliance frameworks, like I was saying, describe what you need to accomplish versus implementation guides describing what you need to set or change, and so implementation guides tend to be, I love the term nerd knob. I stole it from someone a long time ago, and just a bunch of nerd knobs, things that you need to turn on and they can get very technical, but and the compliance frameworks aren't as technical, a lot of people in process, but yeah. Compliance frameworks don't answer the question of how do I get this done? How do I do this? They don't answer that. Implementation guides don't generally tell you why. Just do this and be quiet, and so the very parental sort of thing there. But that's actually something at VMware we try not to do, like the security configuration guide. We always try to have why in there, a little bit of discussion, a little bit of context. Context really is important in security. And so compliance frameworks are negotiable via compensating controls. If you're not familiar with the term compensating controls, learn it, live it, love it. You're going to love this. The idea, and I'll tell you a story from my previous life. Compensating controls, if you can't meet a security control directly, maybe there's something else you can do to make up for it, to compensate for it. And so a story from my past is PCI DSS. In fact, PCI DSS says that 321 control control 8.2.4, I know it by heart, says that that's possibly sad. It says that you need to expire passwords every 90 days. Well, for service accounts and things like that, that's a giant pain in the duff. Every quarter, I've got to rotate a password. And so I've had some real positive experiences with auditors. I'll just take a step back and say my first experience with auditors was colored by the sysadmins, the old guys that I was working with when I was an AIX admin back in the day. And they told me, don't talk to the auditors, don't only answer their question, don't offer them any information, all that stuff. And what they were looking for was just wrong, so I waited for the old guys to go to lunch, and now I'm the old guy, but I waited for the more senior staff to go to lunch and leave me alone. And the auditor stopped by, and I was like, hey, we need to talk. And we actually got a bunch of stuff fixed, and it was a good conversation. That's actually kind of where I learned that you can talk about this stuff with the auditors. They're not the devil, as it turns out, or maybe they're just the devil we like. I don't know. Either way, you can have a conversation with them. And so later, a few years later, probably a decade later at that point, having to comply with PCI DSS and the password expiration. Just, we don't have staff to rotate all these passwords in that. Is there something we can do every quarter? Can we lengthen that a little bit? So they said, well, how long do you want to go? And I'm like, how about a year? And then they're like, well, how about 6 months? Okay. So what the auditor did was looked up, you've got rough estimates out there about password cracking, and that's a really interesting field, by the way. The new NVIDIA, every time NVIDIA drops a new generation of GPUs, security folks go buy them. I just saw something that the 4090s are equivalent to like 25 1060s or whatever. I'm probably getting them model numbers wrong or whatever, but the generational leaps there are just dooming passwords for sure. But so there's charts how long that password would survive an active cracking attempt like that. And so they looked at that and they're like, well, if you want to change it, so instead of having 8 characters in your password, they're like, why don't we do 15, 14, 15? I don't quote me on it, but for our purposes here, we'll say, why don't you do 15 character passwords? And that's enough entropy to survive 6 months. And I said, perfect. I love you very much. And that helped immensely. So it's negotiable. It really is. However, implementation guides are not negotiable. Pass or fail. You either meet what's suggested there or you don't. But, if you're scoring or whatever, it's, and so a lot of times when you've got a compensating control, doing that now, I just, all of the scans, all of the PCI checks and all that stuff that I could do in an automated fashion against my environment would fail because I'm using a compensating control. So we just have to document it, that sort of thing. Anyhow, moving along, compliance frameworks are interested in both process and technology. Implementation guides only cover the technology, though. That's, and so if you can't be PCI compliant just using an implementation guide. There's a bunch of organizational process that needs to happen there too. And so that's really important to remember. There's no good way to automate a compliance framework, because it's so generalized. And implementation guides in general, though, are able to be scripted, use APIs to set specific things and check them, that sort of thing. When it comes right down to it, though, the compliance framework is what you're actually judged on. And that's what the auditor is going to use to determine whether you're meeting the requirements or not. And the implementation guide is not. And it's somebody's opinion about how to meet the requirements when it comes right down to it. A lot of stuff on the internet. There's a lot of great information out on the internet. But there's a lot of information out on the internet that, and we see this on Twitter and all that stuff. Armchair quarterbacks, that sort of thing. The people generating a lot of the stuff aren't necessarily auditors. They're not necessarily experts. They're not necessarily even involved in compliance and that, and don't understand these nuances. And so implementation guides, you take it with a grain of salt. Ken is asking, hey, Ken, let's see, will these slides be shared anywhere? I could do that. Why don't I put up a PDF of them up on core.vmware.com/security for you, and I'll leave a link in the comments or in the description of this YouTube video as well. But core.vmware.com/security. Why don't you check tomorrow? And actually, if I don't write it down, I'm going to forget it. Here, hang on. What did I do with my pen? Here we go. All right, cool, good idea. Yeah, so I can do that. So let's go through some of these things. NIST 800-53 revision 4. There's also a revision 5. Yeah, no problem, Ken. Thanks for asking. The yeah, beats having to sit through the whole thing as well. But NIST 800-53 R4. Is this a compliance framework or an implementation guide? Survey says it's a compliance framework. That is correct. How about the DSS STIG? Popular among public sector folks, Defense Department. I do remind people that it's Defense Department specific. It's got guidance in there, like connecting to Active Directory. That may or may not be good advice for general environments. There's a lot of good advice in STIGs, but again, you take it with a grain of salt. Do you actually have to comply with the STIG, or are you just using it as an implementation guide for to meet other criteria? Again, STIGs are great security content, but they are specific to the DoD. PCI DSS. Oh my goodness, we've been talking about this all along here. It's a compliance framework. But what about the CIS benchmarks? CIS benchmarks can help secure operating systems and things like that. They do get kind of down in the weeds. And I like the CIS benchmarks. They do a lot of stuff. In fact, I'm starting a new relationship with them so that we can get the security baseline stuff into the vSphere security or CIS benchmarks too, that we can match those up more closely, and that'll be nice. So looking forward to working with them on their implementation guides. However, CIS also publishes, this used to be the SANS Top 20, it's the CIS Top 18 now. These controls here, this is more of a compliance framework. This is a great starting point for a lot of organizations too. That I got asked by a friend of mine, who took over a security job. People get maybe not forced into it, but end up doing security. Where do I start? And I said, go here, work your way down. Asset inventories, especially. There's a reason the number 1 and number 2 controls are there. How about the security configuration guide? What is this? Well, this is an implementation guide. It's certainly not a compliance framework. That's people use it as a checklist. It's suggestions. Again, it's meant to be a reasonable baseline. Can you go above and beyond it? Turn it all to 11? Absolutely. Should you? Again, that conversation we had earlier about just because you can doesn't mean you should, sort of thing. You're trading. Security controls are all overhead. Anything you set, you have to maintain in perpetuity, right? And so that's actually an approach we're taking moving forward here is things that are default or set correctly by default in the products. Don't set them. Just save yourself the time managing it. Well, what about the compliance kits? Well, we talked about these. They're implementation guides. And again, try to answer the whys and the how, not just what you need to do, but why you're doing it, how to get it done, that sort of thing. We've got a whole process at VMware that we're mostly implemented around creating and validating this guidance. And, as a new feature goes into vSphere or into any product, honestly, I love the word interrogate, basically interrogate the features. Basically, hey, what is this feature? What is this enhancement? Are there security controls? Are those set by default correctly? That sort of thing. As we add them to the products, we can take a look at them, and then we can determine what those capabilities are. Should it be in the security baseline and the security configuration guide, or should it not? Is it set by default correctly? Like I was saying, what changed? That sort of thing. Then we can test it. There's a real emphasis in vSphere 8 on secure defaults. And part of that is for testing. If it's just set that way by default, then it gets tested automatically, right? Hey, win for everybody, And so does the product still work? We've had some issues with the DISA STIGs, for example, what DISA requires us to do and customers end up doing sometimes has got problems there. And so that's something that we're negotiating and figuring out actually right now. But then also, how do we automate this stuff? How do we, can we automate it? That's a real growth area for us. For liability reasons, actually, we haven't been able to publish tools to help with this stuff, because the big what if, every once in a while, we get a customer that has a security problem, and it's not something it's not a good situation, but they're looking for somebody to blame. Well, Bob, we did your security configuration guide and we got hacked anyhow. And I always want to show them the UL rating slide from earlier or whatever, but just because, everything has to be evaluated in context. And so we really are worried about that. We want to set expectations correctly in that. But anyhow, Power CLI, being able to automate this stuff, really important to us and really important to us moving forward as we develop some of these things. I'm talking about roadmaps now. We've got a database for compliance controls. We store all of this stuff in there. And then from there, we can figure out the deltas from the baseline to, what does PCI DSS require that's different than the baseline? What is ISO 27001, the GDPR stuff? What does that require that's different from the baseline? And then we can develop that guidance. And then we can get together with compliance auditors. We saw in the compliance kit a group called Tavora. We work with them to validate our guidance. And so there's different types of guidance that VMware puts out. There's that sort of stuff, which is like the gold standard. Somebody else checked our work. It's solid. There's other stuff where we're providing guidance, but, and we've tested it and checked it, but it's not the same level of attestation, the same level of reliability that we can claim if a third-party auditor checks. But it's still helpful, that security configuration guide is like that, and then there's other random internet sorts of stuff, in the communities and whatnot. But we can engage with them, we can engage with consultants, and then when all that is done, we can update the public-facing parts of these things, especially pushing this stuff into things like Cloud Health Secure State, VROPS, and Log Insight, being able to do the content packs for those things. Really cool. We're also pushing a lot of the security baseline guidance into the documentation too, to help make it authoritative, So, and yeah, that'll help immensely with settling arguments about, because especially as guidance changes over time, and it does, because the security landscape changes over time, our compliance and security guidance needs to change too. And so that'll help be authoritative sources. So anyhow, audit enablement. We've talked a lot about audit enablement here. At some point, some human's going to have to take all of this stuff and figure out how to get it into the product. Hopefully the combination of these tools and can help auditors improve auditor understanding. A sysadmin is usually the poor sap that has to do the security controls and implement them, that sort of thing. And so I ended up being that person, and that's kind of how I'm talking to you today, and so but in the end, hopefully all of these things come together, that the audits can go faster. You have less fights with your auditors and with your management, and you can just get back to your own business sooner. That's the goal. Again, all overhead. You want to be doing stuff that moves your business forward. This doesn't necessarily do that, and so trying to speed you along is kind of what we've got in the back of our minds all the time. Reference architectures. This is, I guess, negotiable a little bit. We used to have the VVD. Now we've got VCF. VCF is really, I was saying earlier, is really kind of the model for this, because it's got more pieces to the puzzle, but we can still do vSphere. In fact, a vSphere security reference architecture. We just published some guidance about that yesterday, in fact, part of a ransomware event that we had at VMware for partners and their partners and such. But out on core.vmware.com/security, you can find a paper on actually installing vSphere and configuring it with all the security, again, trying to get to the whys of things. What we did in order to build an environment, from the ground up, build a vSphere environment that was secure and had all modern security practices in it, but also the decisions that we had to make and why we might have chosen differently, that sort of thing. And so, reference architectures are good, but again, they're guidelines. A lot of the stuff that database, we've got some patented processes that allow us to pivot into the different regulations. So we use NIST 800-53 as our baseline for most stuff. And then we work with partners. We work with the NIST folks themselves, the NCCOE, and on their trusted cloud stuff to basically develop this sort of thing where we can take our guidance and we can run it into we can take this guidance, it's verified by NIST itself. We run it through auditors, those Tavora folks that we were talking about it. We validate it ourselves, and then we can pivot it into the different regulations and save ourselves time and also provide some commonality too, especially where customers have to meet two different regulations. Maybe you need NIST 800-53 and PCI and HIPAA, for example. PCI and HIPAA would often come together in healthcare settings, and the need to take credit cards to pay for healthcare, the need to provide healthcare services makes sense, right? And so, if there's commonality there, or the ability to at least see which one of those, the more stringent of the two, we like helping drive that, helping people figure that stuff out. And so this process is really helpful in that regard. And then last, tools and support. I was already talking about that. You'll see more of this stuff. We've got some stuff slated for release here in Q4 and Q1 of next year that should help immensely with these sorts of things. And like I said, I mentioned Cloud Health Secure State. We've been talking with them lately too about the ability to, they've got the ability to continuously monitor things, and that'll be really helpful moving forward. So, just pieces of the puzzle. So, speaking of moving forward, let's talk about, and I'm pretty sure this guy's photoshopped into this thing. Who would carry their briefcase up the mountain like that? But, the rocky terrain ahead of us, figuring out how we move forward in our organizations. And, how do you work with auditors? How do you work with all this stuff? And I would remind folks that compliance, again, is based on implementations, not on the products themselves. A product can be safe, and pass certifications and things, but you can still, in the case of a light switch, you can still burn down your house, right? And so it's really based on the implementations. You have to make the implementation secure, not just the product itself is something you use as part of that puzzle. Compensating controls, I mentioned that earlier. The idea that if you can't meet a particular security control, perhaps you can compensate for it by doing other things. I gave the example of password entropy and the need to rotate passwords on a regular basis. A compensating control could be more entropy there. There's other compensating controls. Authentication can be compensating controls for other things, all kinds of stuff. And so it should be a negotiation. When you're doing compensating controls, when you're doing this stuff, it's really important because audits happen once a year, once every couple of years, whatever the interval is, whatever that is, you're going to forget why. Hands down, the number one thing you're going to forget is why you did something. Get a wiki and put it in there. Why is this control in there? Why is this like this? And so the next time you get asked by an auditor, you've got an answer for it. And it actually is a really nice baseline, something that you can review later. Because sometimes those whys change, context changes, right? Environments evolve, threat landscapes evolve, all that stuff. And so what was the reason before might not be a good reason anymore. Ports.vmware.com. I spent a year and a half collecting and revising. Yes, it's completely not sexy work at all, but so crucial to our customers and to anybody implementing this stuff that we have good firewalling guidance. And so we revamped all of the vSphere firewalling guidance, at least, and serves as a model for a lot of the other products too. But it's got a lot of great information, ingress, egress, who you're talking to, what you need to open. It's on a feature by feature basis. So if you're not using a feature, you don't have to turn it all on, that sort of thing. It helps immensely with auditing a lot of the stuff. And so I mentioned it. Speaking of auditing stuff, I have some very particular opinions about, and this is Bob's opinion, about compliance and security scanning tools. We get asked about them on a regular basis. Compliance scanning tools, remember that implementation guides are checkable. Compliance frameworks, or the actual framework itself, is not that checkable. And so a compliance scanning tool will implement what is effectively an implementation guide. It's somebody's opinion. Remember, it's somebody's opinion. Might not be good, might not be bad, whatever. Might not be bad, might be fine, whatever, but you take it with a grain of salt. You remember somebody in a room at a vendor somewhere came up with this. You don't know the rationale, you don't know any of that stuff. And these things can be negotiable, but implementation guides aren't negotiable. Compliance scanning tools can't scan people or process. And so there's all those gaps there. They don't record compensating controls. Again, because implementation guides are pass fail. If you don't look exactly like what the implementation guide says, you fail. Even if you go above and beyond, a lot of the vSphere compliance checks check for a certain setting for password complexity. People who have it set beyond that fail, and it's basically a false a false positive there so human interpretation needs to happen to these scanning reports. And that's always the thing I always asked in my former life. I always asked if I could I run the scanner on my own environment? And they looked at me once and I'm like, help me get ahead of all this stuff. And so they gave me access to it. And that was incredibly instructive because I could do it on my own time. And I could go through and audit their audit report, basically, and say, hey, that's not right. That's actually false. So you take that big page of red X's that somebody walks up to you and says, hey, fix this. There's one or two things in there. And then you can have a conversation about prioritizing those fixes. Maybe you accept the risk. That's another negotiable thing. Some things, maybe you just accept the risk, and something to talk about with your auditor. You also can't test design decisions. Things in regulatory frameworks, compliance frameworks often well, they'll talk about, ensuring availability. NIST 800-53 is very much aligned to the CIA triad: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And so they'll ask about availability, but that's not something a scanner can test. How are you doing availability with your network connections? You're using LACP, you're using failover, whatever. Those are good answers for that. But it can't check for that. Maybe you only really have one NIC in there, or maybe it's misconfigured so you don't have any failover, and that'll be a surprise someday, but so it's very limited applicability to and helpfulness to the compliance side of things. And so you really need to take these things with a grain of salt. Speaking of scanning tools, many of them, I talk to customers on on a periodic basis. Hey, should we turn on SSH? Our auditors want to log into ESXi as root, and do a scan. And oh my goodness, no, don't do it. Assess it as it is. If you're being judged on this, let them judge you based on the environment as it sits. If you have SSH on, my God, turn it off. You don't need it anymore. Or if you need it for specific things, just script it. Power CLI, you can turn on enable the service, do what you need to do, and then shut it off again. That sort of thing. But you don't need to leave it on all the time. It's just attack surface you don't need. And all these scanners think ESXi, they think anything running SSH is Linux, and ESXi is not Linux. There's really not a permission model in ESXi. It's not meant to be there. It's meant to be a troubleshooting interface. And so anybody logging into ESXi, root or otherwise, basically is root and can do whatever. And so these scanners log in as SSH, notice Linux-like things, but it's not Linux, and the permissions are wrong, and it doesn't know that it's just a read-only file system and all of this stuff, and it just freaks out, and so all these findings get put into a report, and then back to management or whatever. Management goes, oh my God, all of this stuff needs to get fixed. Well, the fix is shut SSH off. You never should have turned it on in the first place. So, from the 80s, the whole war on drugs and all that stuff, not going to get into that, but the saying, just say no, applies to this. And to that end, I've got something out on core.vmware.com about frequently asked questions. And right at the end, I've got, should I turn on SSH? And some thoughts, you'll sometimes lose that battle, but hopefully you can convince folks to just scan as is. Another thing to keep in mind, auditors, it's not their job to know vSphere and VMware products really well, and so they generally don't. Some of them, give and take. I put an asterisk by this because I'm making generalizations here, and that's not always generally true. For auditors that know better or have specific centers of excellence, the big auditing firms or whatever actually have expertise in this stuff and can develop audit techniques specific to products and that. Great, that's perfect, but other auditors don't, and so you might have to help them, and not taking that adversarial relationship with them, actually explaining it, and that ends up to be really helpful, because hey, if you're not fighting with the guy, or lady, the whoever it is, if you're not fighting with them, you can ask them about compensating controls, all that sort of stuff, and they'll work with you. They need to be comfortable signing off on your environment, and you need them to sign off on the environment, so you got to meet in the middle somewhere. Anyhow, that's like all this fuzzy people and process stuff. That's not why we got into computers. We don't want to deal with people and process. Welcome to compliance. Welcome to security. Everything in security is a people problem, honestly. Last here, not compliance. This was told to me once. Don't know where, but it's always resonated with me that compliance frameworks are not a straitjacket. And it goes to the negotiability. It goes to you're trying to get something done, and you're trying to do it without killing the organization, spending a ton of staff time on it, and all that stuff. It's not a straitjacket. Implementation guides can be seen as a straitjacket sometimes, and that's, I think, where this comes from. But remember, it's negotiable. So I appreciate all of you. My final parting thoughts to you here. If you do nothing after this, please sign up for nothing. If you do nothing else, Doing nothing after this actually sounds really nice, but I'm gonna go find some lunch, in fact. But the here in the Midwest, it's almost 1 o'clock. But the sign up for the security advisory mailing list. Should do this for all of your vendors, but VMware, I often say that this is the most negative, awful email list you'll be part of from VMware. We don't send marketing stuff to it. We don't send anything but bad news. But we want to tell you the bad news because the bad guys know the bad news too. And that's the thing about security, is we can't tell the bad guys without telling the good guys, or we can't tell, no, other way around. Can't tell the good guys without telling the bad guys too. And so the best we can do is tell everyone at the same time and hope for the best. This is a good way to get it delivered to your inbox proactively. Log4j, a lot of our customers actually thought Log4j was a VMware problem, and it was. We use Log4j everywhere, it turns out. But people thought Log4j was just a VMware problem because they got an alert from the security announce mailing list in their mailbox. And that's how a lot of our customers found out about it. So important to do. Other than that, we've got compliance stuff, core.vmware.com, compliance, security, ransomware, all kinds of good stuff. And again, join me on Monday on Halloween here in the US. Infrastructure hardening. We'll talk about the nitty gritty, the nerd knobs, why to do things, why not to do things, and some tools and tactics for that. So I don't see any more questions out there. I will post the slides. Like I said, Ken, check tomorrow. Give me a little time to do that here this afternoon. And thank you, Noel, for your comment earlier. If there's anything left here, I don't see anything else. You can certainly reach out. I'm Plankers on Twitter. That is my personal account, but I'm definitely willing to engage if you've got questions or whatever. And if you're an auditor and have some opportunities for talking about this with other groups and auditing groups and stuff like that, that's an area I'd like to get into and help auditors and those people that see that side of the process, help them understand some of the stuff and take feedback from them. We really enjoy feedback. And so, thank you. I appreciate you all, and take good care of yourselves. Okay.